Are you not at all concerned about AI as a writer? Because, these models are getting smarter and smarter every single week. And just generally, how do you look at the sort of future of work in a world of AI? It feels like it's going to be such a disruptive force in, you know,
Oh, I think it is.
career planning and like,
Yeah.
what do I do with my future?
I mean, it might touch everything, but one, I love playing with it. So I have these competing forces of like, maybe it'll, um, I'm a very curious person. And so if I play with probably about four different AI programs a day, but the one that's the most useful to me is called Site.ai. Again, is it, I don't have like any affiliation with any of these things. I'm just a subscriber. SCITE.ai, where I can put in a scientific paper and it'll make like a map showing all the other papers that cite it, and it'll try to automatically sort them into those that agree and disagree. And it really helpfully will show the snippet of how the target paper was cited in these other ones. That I used to have to spend like go sit in a research library and be doing that by like scanning down a paper to find that. So it's like a day now is an hour. And so, and I love that. Like if that means my books don't sell as well, but I get to learn 10 times as much science, that's a trade-off I'm definitely willing to make personally. I'm not saying everyone should be willing to make that, but I'm willing to make that trade-off. But in terms of work generally being disrupted, yeah, I mean, I think the model that I think of for sort of, there's no singular model, but for how technological innovation has disrupted work in the past, a model that I like that I can tell sort of quickly is the introduction of the ATM in the United States. It happened around 1970. So cash machine. And I went back and looked at news coverage, and it says like every 300,000 bank tellers are going to go out of business overnight. And instead, what happened over the next 40 years, as there were more ATMs, there were more bank tellers, not fewer, because ATMs made bank branches cheaper to operate. So there were fewer branches overall, fewer tellers per branch, but more branches overall, sorry. But it fundamentally changed the job from someone who's doing these repetitive cash transactions, to someone who's like a marketing professional and a customer service representative and maybe a financial advisor. It shifted them to these strategic goals where it's a much broader mix of strategic skills. So if we can outsource some of that kinder learning environment, repetitive stuff to shift humans to being more strategic, I think that's like a good thing, right? We think about, I know radiologists have been some of the people who deal with medical imaging have been some of the people who have often in these reports by banks that say who's going to be replaced. They're often high on the list because they say the technology can, read these pictures very easily.
A radiologist looks at a scan and tells you if you've got a cancer or something.
Yeah, but first of all, I have yet to hear the problem of like, wow, too many people are having too easy access to radiology, right? Like I think we want more of this service. But I think most doctors are not doing Dr. House, Most of the stuff they're seeing is something they've seen a million times. And I think a really important role for them is strategic of, well, what should this mean to the person? How should I deal with them? And what's reasonable to implement in their life? And what's feasible for them to do to make a change? And so I think it'd be great if we could shift. I don't think it will replace those doctors. I think it might shift them to a more strategic role where they don't have to spend time doing the sort of more tactical stuff and can do the more strategic stuff. So that's been even in chess, like when IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov in chess in 1997, and he noticed that it beat Garry Kasparov. He was so much better when he was the best in the world at the time. Now, like a free app on your phone would beat Garry Kasparov, and he noticed the computer was so much better at tactics. These are these like small patterns of moves that he had spent his life memorizing. But he noticed it wasn't as good at strategy, which is how to arrange the battles to wage the war. So he promoted what he called freestyle chess tournaments, where humans and computers could play in any combination. And the winners were neither supercomputers nor grandmasters with supercomputers. Two amateur chess players with 3 laptops. They knew something about chess. They knew something about algorithmic search. And they could coach the computers where to look. Like they couldn't even analyze their own games in like the winner's press conference at a deep level because they didn't know enough about chess. But I think the lesson there is when the tactical part was outsourced, it shifted, first of all, it changed the people who were the best at the task like this, and it shifted the humans to the more strategic level. And so I think that's what we need to be ready to think about. What can we hand off so that we shift to a more strategic level?
How might you be wrong?
Maybe the strategic level, maybe these tools will be better at the strategic level than we would ever be. I still think there'll be a role for us in determining what their goals should be. And that's a whole other level of strategy, is like, what kind of world do we want to live in? I don't think in the near term that we're going to be taking our cues from them in that role. But I think even the people, like last year I was sitting around a campfire with one guy who's running a generative AI company and another guy who was like his first investor and who himself had worked in AI. Like, you know, they were both technologically adept, incentives aligned. And one guy was saying, we'll have artificial general intelligence within 3 years for sure. And the other guy was saying, I think this is a glorified toy. I still use Google more. And these were two people with similar expertise with incentives aligned, which to me suggests the degree to which even the people working on this stuff don't totally understand what its capabilities are or what it's doing. And so I think there's a lot that's unknown.
Someone made the case to me that they said, think about it like this, Steve. You've got this Steve here, say my IQ is 100, and there's another Steve through that wall whose IQ is 1,000. What would you give me to do as a task versus what would you give him to do as a task? Who would you want to drive your kids to school? Who would you want to, I don't know, answer
So you're
emails?
saying we give everything to that person?
Well, this is the analogy he gave me. He was like, what are you left with?
Okay, even if it comes to that point, there'll still be the issue of comparative advantage, which is that these models are incredibly energy intensive, right? And so you'd want to delegate energy to them for the things that you really want them to do. So even if they do end up better than us at everything, because energy is not unlimited, there will still be things that are more valuable to have us doing than to have them doing, right? Even like, I mean, that's the case all the time. You may be better at certain things in your business, but you're not doing them because it's a comparative advantage for you to do this instead of those other things. Mm-hmm. So I think even if they do get to the point where they're better than us at everything, there's still roles for humans, but incredible amount of disruption, right? Like what really worries me, I mean, I was reading about last year about technological innovation in history, you know, and we have like, to put it in a very coarse nutshell, it's like for 300,000 years, we lived like squirrels. And then for 10,000 years, we lived like farmers. And then in 250 years, it's like everything changed every generation like crazy. And that's been hard to adapt to. And I think, you know, I thought that the Industrial Revolution, this, you know, which ultimately led to pulling billions of people out of poverty, you know, changed everything. I thought that because productivity increased so much that wages and things would have increased right along with them. But it turns out that there's pretty good evidence that there was actually a gap of probably about 40 years between the increase of productivity and the increase of wages. And that's not good. Like a 40-year gap between a huge technological disruption and like shared prosperity, that's not something I think we can really afford. And what sort of helped solve the problem is that when lots of people got urbanized for the Industrial Revolution and looked around and said, hey, you have the same problem that I have, we need to band together for collective action. I think the challenge now is we're like an invisible factory. So it's harder to get people to collectively act because we're not sitting next to each other dealing with this problem. But I think we need to start thinking as a group of, this technology is cool, but identifying problems that we want it to work on, not just building it out for the sake of just it's cool. What kind of world do we want to live in? I think we need to be asking those questions fast.
I think it's quite unlikely that we'll be intentional with it in the way that you're hoping.
It'd be unfortunate. I mean, I think a good sign, though, I think, is that even the kind of technologists who I think are usually prone to hyperbole and saying, like, this will be the greatest thing, even when it's obviously not going to be, are sounding some notes of caution with this one in an early stage. And so I think that's attuned other people to some of those notes of caution. I don't think that gets us out of the woods by any stretch.
The notes of caution worry me.
Oh, well, that's the point. They should worry. I think if we were where we are and not worried right now, I think that would be a lot worse.
What is the most important idea in your work that we haven't discussed, in your opinion?
In the sports gene, I think the most important idea that we haven't discussed is that talent at baseline, like the talent, if you take a test in something, let's say you haven't trained in that thing, that we'll call that your talent baseline, is sometimes correlated with your ability to improve from training. So training looks just like medicine because of differences between us. Some medicine might work for you in a way that it doesn't for me. Training is similar. Two people will get different results from the same exact training. And sometimes how good you are to start is predictive of how rapidly you'll improve, but very often it is not. And that's a huge deal because we usually judge people's potential based on what we see right now or what we see at baseline before they've really had a chance to train. But what I think the science shows is that this talent of trainability is even more important than talent at baseline. And so if you're trying to evaluate people before they've really had a chance to find a training that fits for them, again, it's a messy answer because it means people have to experiment with the kind of training that works for them. And that trainability is the most important kind of talent. And I think that's a different picture of talent.
Okay, this is very important because it immediately, as an employer, I thought when I'm hiring people, if I'm hiring a producer for one of our podcasts, whatever, I shouldn't be focusing so much on, if I'm planning for them to work with me for 10 years, I should be thinking about their trainability.
Yeah, I was going to say it depends how quickly you need them to get going, right? If you need to know what they know today and they need to be using that thing tomorrow, that's one thing. But if it's about how good they're going to get in the long run, you just shouldn't assume that what you're seeing today predicts like their ability to improve at a certain
Can you measure someone's trainability?
I mean, you can measure it very easily in things like their aerobic capacity, the amount of oxygen that they can move through their body. I mean, some of the initial studies of this were done in scenarios like that, where you had everyone doing the exact same training and you were literally measuring physiological parameters. You can do it in other types of cognitive testing and ability testing. If you're looking for a sort of specific task, that's a little harder. If you're looking for a task that's customized to something in your business, I think that's more difficult. It's going to be a little more subjective.
I guess you can kind of look at other areas of their life, I guess, in the professional context to see how quickly they developed. One of the things I look at when people apply for jobs to work in one of my businesses is I look at their LinkedIn resume, but specifically how quickly they got promoted and moved through departments, because that's kind of an indicator. It's obviously not the most important thing, but you'll click on someone's LinkedIn and you'll see they joined as an intern, and then a year later they were a manager of the team. Then a year later they were the director of the team. Then a year later they were moved up to a different department. A year later they became the global head. And I'm like, oh my God, this person really moves through the system well. And that is an indicator of a few things. They get on with people because someone's pulling them up and saying that person go up. Their team are also basically voting that they should be the manager. They have proficiency in learning rapidly because, especially if they jump between sort of departments from HR to culture or whatever. And I always think that makes them a bit more adaptable and teachable if they've shown that track record of changing professions and moving up the organization quickly. If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.